Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Daf Beis, Bava Basra 2. Today's Daf is dedicated for Yeshua for Am Yisrael, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, Shmira for the Chayalim. And we start the new Masechta that's called Bava Basra. Tosfos actually says at the very beginning, the first Tosfos says, Kul Nezikin Chada Masechta. All of Nezikin is one long tractate, meaning to say that Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra are really long tractate. And we just divide them up out of convenience, but it's really one continuous topic. So now it says the Mishnah at the top of Beis Amud Aleph, Hashutfin Sheratzu Asos Mechitza B'Chatzer. Let's say that partners decided to make a mechitza in the courtyard. And the first way the Gemara understands this is that they decided to make a wall in their courtyard. So then under those circumstances, bonin as hakosel be'emtza, they build a wall in the middle of the courtyard. Makom shenagu of no skavil, gazis, kafisin, ovenin, bonin, a place where they have to practice to use these different types of material that are either called Gavil, Gazis, Kfisin, or Ovenim. We build it with that. Hakol Kuminag Medina. We always follow the typical practice of the place where people live. Gavil is generally speaking an uncut piece of stone. So therefore, that's typically 6 tefachim. So Zeno saying Gimel tefachim, the Zeno saying Gimel tefachim. Each side has to give forth 3 tefachim of space and materials. It's 3 handbreadths. Gazis, this is a sanded down stone. Zeno saying tefachim, tefachim or melch. Zeno saying tefachim melch. That's 2.5 each. Kfisin is a type of brick. Zenotain tefachim, zenotain tefachim. Each one gives it 2 tefachim. But this is another type of brick. Zenotain tefachim melch, zenotain tefachim melch. Each one gives 1.5. Ufikach. Therefore, if nafla kosel, let's say this wall falls down, that both sides split the place, the area of the courtyard where the wall took up, and the stone. They split the materials. V'chein begina, and so too by a garden. Let's see what that means in the Gemara. Makom shenago ador, a place where there's a practice. And so to a garden, a place where there's a practice to make a fence, we obligate them to make a fence. But in the valley, Malcolm Shinago Shalolodor, in a place where there's a practice not to make a fence, Amen. So we don't obligate him to do so. And if it's a valley, we don't obligate him to make a fence. But rather, if he wants to make a fence, he builds it in his property, and then he makes a sign. We'll see what exactly the sign is, and he makes a sign on the outside indicating that this is his property. So therefore, since it's all on his property, the person who built the fence has that space because it's on his property, and he gets to keep the materials, the stones. But if both of them agree to build this fence, you build the wall in the middle. You make the sign on either side. So they both split it if it falls under those circumstances. It says the Gemara Savrua, the initial assumption of how to read our Mishnah in the yeshiva, the initial assumption was, what does it mean when it says that partners that want to make a mechitza? The initial assumption was my mechitza. What's the mechitza? A guda, a wall, like we have, a partition. In the Tanya, and the Gemara gives an example of another case where the word mechitza means a wall. Like we know that there is a prohibition called mechitza sakarem. There's a prohibition called kilayim, that you're not allowed to plant and next to a grapevine. One of these ideas is you can't plant grain seeds next to a grapevine. Seeds next to the grapevine, and so that's called kilaya karam. That's called the mixture, prohibited mixture of the vineyard. So let's say you have mechitza sakaram. Let's say you have a wall in a vineyard, shenifritza, and this wall was broken down, and basically Omer, you say to the person who broke it, Gedor, go fix the fence. You say to the person who owns the vineyard, in this case, uh, fix the fence so your grapevine will not prohibit my kalayim. Because the person who had the field planted the seeds right next to the fence. And so therefore, one of the preventions against kalayim actually is if you have a fence in between the two, that'll be okay. Now this person broke the fence. So we say Gedor and Chazra, go make the fence again. And Chazra, and he did, and Vinifritza was broken again. Omar Gedor, he said to do it again. And finally, the guy gives up. The guy who owns the vineyard, more on top of Bezma base. The Sayashimenam, who Gadra, he had enough. He didn't do it. So now his grapevines are going to make the seeds prohibited. They're going to make them Kulaya Karam. Hareza Kidesh. And he's going to be he's ruined it and he's responsible if it's a greater ratio than 1 in 200. So under these circumstances, we say that it is a wall. So we see that the word mechitza means a wall. So that's the upshot of why the Gemara cites this subject. Gemara says taima deratzu, but wait 1 second. Let's figure out another implication of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, what's the reason why they put up a wall? Because they want to put up a wall. But if they didn't want to put up the wall, we wouldn't force them. It says ashutfin sharotin asos machitza. The ashutfin sharatzu asos machitza. The partners that wanted to build a machitza, time and the ratzo, it's only because they wanted to. Hello ratzo, but if they didn't want to build this machitza, ein mechayvin, so we actually would not obligate them to build a machitza. We see from here a fundamental idea. And this is the idea that we're going to discuss for the next day and a half. And that is whether or not, and also for a lot of this first chapter, whether or not we say hezek re'iyah is considered to be damages or not. What's damages is hezek. Re'iyah is seeing. Whether you are seeing into somebody else's property, if that's going to be considered like you've done a damage against them. Before, the American jurisprudence discussed the concept of a right to privacy, something that was that Brandeis is attributed to have really cemented that idea in American law. So before that, there was this idea in the Gemara called Hezek Re'iyah. We see from here the fact that we don't obligate them to build a wall. It's only if they want to. We see from here, says the Gemara, is the first assumption, is Hezek Re'iyah, the damages caused by sight, that's not considered Hezek. And so therefore we would not obligate him to build this wall. We would not obligate the partners to build a wall. Gemara says, but wait 1 second. Maybe mechitza does not mean a wall. Maybe mechitza means just a regular division. Maybe mechitza puta. Maybe it means just to divide. Kidel sif. Vatihi mechta sa'eda. And it says, and it was the division of the community. And this was a verse in Bamidbar. At the end of Bamidbar, it says that they had to divide up the spoils. So we see from here that the word machzaka means divide, so maybe it has nothing to do with the concept of hezek re'iyah. The kivin the ratzu, and the way you would read it is, since they wanted to divide it, then bonin es hakosel, then we do force them to build a wall, bal karcho, against their will, and so therefore we prove the opposite. We see alma hezek re'iyah shmei hezek. We see from here that if you're looking at somebody, that's considered to be damages. If you're looking into their courtyard, it would be considered damages. And therefore, we force them to build a wall. The Gemara says, no, we have a problem with that. Why would it say shutfin sharatzu asos mechitza? Why would it say partners that want to build a mechitza? According to this logic, it's partners that want high sharatzu asos mechitza sharatu lachtos me. By the way, it wouldn't have said partners that want to build a mechitza. It would say partners that wanted to divide. So therefore, that cuts against the idea about it being a division. Elamai. So what do you want to say? That it's a guda, that it's a shutfin sharatu asos mechitza refers to a wall. If that's the case, bonin sakota. Why does the next line on the Mishnah say bonin sakosel, that it says that they build the wall in the middle? But why would I have to say wall? Obviously, we just said mechitza. Bonin no selmi, by the way. It should say they should build it in the middle. Gemara says no, itano so, because if it had said they should build it, hava mina mamispas ba'alma. I might have said that the partners that agreed to build the wall, they build it. I might have said that it just means that they need to put pegs in the ground to indicate that that's the the mitzvahs ba'alma. I might have thought that it's just talking about like basic pegs in the ground, and that's also called a mechitza. And when it says ratzu, I might have thought that means that they desired to split it. And when there is nothing, uh, um, and so therefore that's tell us wall. And when it says viratzu, it means a wall, because otherwise they could have just divided with pegs. So therefore the Gemara says, even though machitza could mean wall, nevertheless it still has to say kotel, so otherwise we wouldn't think it was pegs. But anyway, we see from here so that the Gemara is raising the idea of whether or not we say hezek re'iyah is considered to be hezek. Because since from the fact that we say that it's only if they want to build it, that doesn't that prove that hezek re'iyah is not going to be considered hezek, that damages to site is not considered hezek. So the Gemara says, well, is this really the case where they want to build it, that they build it? Well, obviously, if they decide to build it, they would build it. Gemara says, no, we're talking about a case where one person convinced the other one to build a wall. And he might have said, that the person who was convinced could now claim, when I agreed to build it, ba'avira, meaning to say, I agreed in the airspace, but bitashmishta lois ratzi, but I didn't agree to the actual use of it, meaning to say that which I agreed, that was with respect to the air, that I will diminish the airspace of my courtyard. But I was intending to use a very, very thin wall, and you're using a thicker wall, which I never agreed to. So we say, no, Kamash one, you follow the typical wall of the area. And we've established, the Gemara seems to have suggested that hezek is not considered to be damages. The Gemara asked that question, hezek lav shmei hezek, is it really not damages? Well, what about the fact that it states, and the Gemara is going to bring 6 proofs to try and prove that hezek is considered to be damages. And the way to remember this, the simon is Gina, Koso, Kofin, Cholkin, Chalonos, and the Rav Nachman. In the first approach, Tashma, V'chein Begina, it says you basically have to put up this wall in the garden. So doesn't that prove that hezek is damages? The Gemara says, no, Gina is Shani, a garden is different. In a garden, you'd have to put it up. Why? Kid Rabbi Abba, Dama Rabbi Abba, Marpuna Marav, Asra Adam Ramod B'Sadeh Chavero B'Shah Shehi Omedes B'Kamoseh. A person is not allowed to stand in the field of his friend when the garden is in its basically growing state, when it's in its full glory, because then you're going to give an ayin hara. And so therefore, that's what you're going to give the evil eye on the garden. And so therefore, in that case, you have to put up a wall. Gemara says, Vavachein katani, but doesn't say, and so too. Gemara says, no, that's just a reference to the veal and the gazis, the materials you use, that once you agree. Tashma, another attempt that has to say that hezek is actually is considered damages, because it says kotzel chatzer shenafal. Let's say you have a wall of a courtyard that fell down. We have in the coming up Mishnah, if you have a wall of a courtyard that fell down, we make them build it up again until 4 amos. We see from here we obligate them to build the wall. The Gemara says no. That case is nafal shani. That's where there was already a wall, so they would make that, and it fell down. So we make them rebuild it because they had already agreed to have a wall. Gemara says, oh yeah, it's such a good question. And the Kari my Karla. So what was your assumption? Why did they even ask that question? Gemara says, Sefer Tzricha. We ask it for the second part of that Mishnah, where it says, that even if the initial wall was 4 cubits, we don't make them go above it when they're on the rebuild, because above 4 cubits, there's no concern about damages. So we don't. So that's how Rashi interprets it. Another case, another attempt. Tashma kofanosel with no space. Shar udelas lachatzer. We force him to build uh, a door and a gate for his courtyard. So we see from here that isn't that the assumption is because we want to block people from looking. Shema mina hezek riyah shmei hezek. So we see from here that in this case we force everybody in the courtyard to contribute to the wall and the door to the courtyard to stop people from looking outside. And so don't we see from here that hezek riyah is considered damages? The Gemara says no. That's not a proof. No, because as they could derive shani, everybody would agree that people looking in from the outside, that's considered hezek, that's considered damages. The question is, people from one courtyard within a general shared courtyard, if we have to be concerned about hezek under those circumstances. Another attempt. We don't force people to divide a courtyard unless each side could have a minimum. Let's say there's a shared courtyard and you want to divide it. We don't force them to divide it unless each side has 4 cubits minimum. But if it's a minimum of 4 cubits, we do force them to divide it. So doesn't that mean that they're dividing it with a wall? And doesn't this prove that there's hezek re'iyah, that there's damages by sight? And so we see from here that hezek re'iyah is damages. And the says no, they could easily divide up the mispas just with pegs in the ground. So that's not an indication that hezek re'iyah is considered damages. Gemara says Tashma, another attempt. That if a person is building his house next to somebody else's house, you have to distance yourself 4 cubits from 4 amos from the windows, 4 amos above, 4 amos below, or 4 amos from right across. So basically, you can't look into his house. Rashi says if you have Echad Mibnei Ashutfim, one of the partners who's building a wall in his courtyard opposite the windows of his friend, if the wall is if the wall is higher than the windows, it needs to be at least 4 amos higher. And if it's lower, it has to be 4 amos lower. And the reason is so that he can stand on his wall, basically, and look into the other person's courtyard. So we see from here that we are concerned about hezek re'iyah. The Tani Allah, and we explain that Mishnah. You have to put it more than 4 cubits high so that you can stand on it and look. We don't want you to stand on the wall and look. And mikenegdan, and the opposite of kadesh lo yafil hazika. So kadesh lo yafil hazika. So you don't block his view. So we see from here that hezek re'iyah is considered damages. And Mar says no, debaya shani. No, if it's a hazika debaya shani, if it's damages in a house, there we are going to be concerned about the right to privacy, the right for the 4 cubits, because the right for privacy, because that's somebody's house. So there he is a higher level of privacy than in a courtyard. Another attempt. Tashma the Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Gag hasamoch l'chatzer chavero. Let's say you have a roof that's next to the courtyard of his friend, and basically the roof is overlooking the courtyard. You have to make a fence that's 4 amos high so that he won't look into the courtyard of his friend when he's using the roof. So doesn't this prove about the concept of hezek re'iyah is considered damages? The Gemara says no. The Gemara says shani also in that case is also different. Because the person who owns the courtyard will say to the person who owns the roof, he says basically, I know I use this courtyard at a fixed time because I'm always using it. But it's not clear to me when you're using it, and so therefore, I'm not going to know when you're on the roof using your courtyard that I'll be able to conduct myself modestly. So therefore, we haven't been able to prove that hezek re'iyah, we had tried to say that hezek re'iyah is considered damages, and the Gemara has not actually proved that. The Gemara's assumption at the outset of our sugya is that hezek re'iyah is not going to be considered damages, and even though the Gemara chipped away at it, the Gemara still said at the end, even though there are discrete cases where it's not damages, in the end, the Gemara at this point, the Gemara is still saying that hezek is not damages. However, we don't paskin like this. We say as follows: the Rambam writes that if there's a courtyard of partners that has a division, or if we say that each one of them is able to force his friend to build a wall in the middle of the courtyard, because the damages through sight is going to be considered damages. And so therefore, that's how the Rambam paskin. That's based upon the continuation of our sugya on Daf Gimel. I'm going to stop the recording, but we still have time to go on, so I'll go on now. So the Gemara says, as